In 1985, it was a good year. Michael Jackson was the king of pop. Back to the Future came out, as well as The Goonies, as well as two men named Simon and Joe Simpson. So Simon Yates, Joe Simpson. They are the first two men to climb Ciudad Grande, which is in the Peruvian Andes. Now, Ciudad Grande is about 4,500 foot vertical face on the western side, and it's about 3,000 foot drop on the eastern side. And they're the first men to have ever climbed it. And they climb up, they make it to the summit, and on their way back down, they have this terrible accident. And Joe at the very top falls down, and in the course of falling, when he hits the snow, your leg is typically structured like this, where you have one bone on top and one bone on bottom with a kneecap in the middle. And the way he hits so that this bottom bone explodes his kneecap and jars up and is sitting parallel with his upper bone. And he's 4,500 feet up, a vertical face in the Andes. And his friend hikes down to him, climbs down to him, and they make this plan. The plan goes something like this. We got 300 feet of rope. And what we're going to do is we're going to tie it around you, and we're going to slide you down 300 feet at a time down this 4,500 foot drop while I anchor myself in. Once we get down to the end of the rope, I'm going to let you stop. You're going to anchor yourself, and I'm going to climb down to you. And then we're going to go again, and we're going to inch our way all the way down. Well, in the process of doing this, night sets in and it gets dark and a blizzard sets in, and they can't see each other and they can't hear each other anymore as long as they start sliding down the mountain. As Simon's kind of got in his head that they're getting down to about the bottom of the mountain on that last run, all of a sudden the rope just takes off. And he stops it and he holds it, and he's waiting and waiting for the weight of the rope to get off, because as soon as the weight can get off of the rope, he can climb back down to his friend. He waits half an hour, hour and a half, and the weight never comes off the rope. And so he's sitting there just holding this weight the whole time. Now, since it's almost a sheer vertical face, this whole 4,500 feet, he's kind of couched himself down in some of the snow that's clinging there, but some of that snow is starting to give way. And inch by inch, he's starting to slide down the mountain, and he knows if he doesn't do anything quickly, he and his friend are going to be tumbling down the mountain out of control. So he makes a real quick decision. He reaches into the back of his backpack, he picks out a small penknife, opens it up, cuts the line. Now it's midnight, it's blizzard, he can't see anything, so he decides the best thing for me to do is to wait it out in the morning, and then I'll come down and I'll see what I can do for my friend. And he climbs down, and he looks for his friend as best he can, but he can't find him anywhere. And his situation is starting to get desperate, so he decides he's going to go ahead and hike out over this glacier and then a couple miles down to their base camp. And he makes it out. But what he doesn't know is when he cut the rope, his friend was hanging off a cliff. And he had no way of getting his weight off that rope because he was being suspended out in midair. And when he cut that rope, his friend Joe fell 80 feet to a mouth of a crevasse, and then fell another 80 feet inside the crevasse and landed on a tiny ledge, and had been waiting there all night and through most of that morning waiting for his friend to come and rescue him. And his friend never came. Now they both get out because this is called Touching the Void. It's a book that Joe Simpson, the guy who was sitting in the bottom of that crevasse, wrote. It also got turned into a documentary. And as I'm watching the documentary, it's just fascinating. If you guys want to go watch it, I really recommend you go watch this, especially if you're into this kind of like survival stuff. Joe makes this really interesting comment. Well, he says that he was raised Catholic. His mother was a very devout Catholic. And he says that very young, he came to this conclusion that there is no God. And he kept living his life, and he kept wondering in the back of his head, you know, if I ever have to face death, am I going to hold to my conviction? Or am I actually going to cry out, God, save me? And when he talks about this, and he talks about his experience sitting down in the bottom of that crevasse for several hours waiting for death to come to him, he says the thought never crossed his mind. And that experience solidified in him that there is this void and there is nothing out there. Now I'm going to steal that concept, the void, because the name of this book, the name of the document is called Touching the Void. And it's named in part because of his experience as he gets down and he faces death and he comes to this conclusion that there's nothing there. There's something about death that takes us to the edge of our knowledge and our experience. You know, we in our human knowledge and our human wisdom, our human finiteness, we have our science, we have our sociology, we have our psychology, we have our understanding of the world, and it creates this space of knowledge about us. And things like death, or when the world flips upside down, it seems like those kind of experiences take us to the edge of that knowledge experience. And as a person of faith, unlike Joe, I have to step out. I have to step out into what he was terming the void. Because out there, out into the mystery of that void, that's where God is calling me. And that's where I leave the things that I know. And my faith begins to walk. And I begin to pursue out after God. Now, as a Christian, I'm not just walking off this cliff into no man's land. I'm pursuing after Christ. And he asked me to believe a good number of things. First, God exists. Second, he created me. Third, I'm going to run on stage here by the time I'm done. Third, I came into this world fist high in rebellion to God. Fourth, this rebellion that I came into the world with, the consequence of that rebellion is separation from the source of life who is God. And anytime you separate yourself from the source of life, it is death. 5, God loves me. 6, I can't keep going, but 6, God sent his son, who is fully God, to take on full humanity, to die in my place. 7, by faith, that death that Jesus paid on the cross for me, he takes my punishment of death and he gives me back his life. Now, for a lot of us here, that's the gospel. That's the good news of Christ, because that life that he gives as a free gift, and that is just good news. And for us as Christians, we've taken this step, and we've taken this step of faith. But a lot of times when we go to talk about this step of faith, we talk about it as if it was this past tense experience. I have trusted Jesus. I have put my faith in Jesus. I have begun to follow Jesus. I believed in Jesus, right? We always talk about this Genesis experience of us beginning to walk into that faith as if it was in the past, and rightly so, because obviously as a Genesis experience, it is in the past. But the reality is, so long as I'm a believer, so long as I follow after Jesus on this planet, I continue to take this step. I continue to walk out into what Joe called the void. I continue to make my life out into this place. And the thing about this place is it's full of mystery. It's full of question. This is the home turf of things like doubt, confusion, insecurity. And as I'm walking through this, I don't just walk through this once by putting my faith in Christ. I walk through this every day. And so long as I walk in this space, there is this opportunity for me to walk and for these doubts, these questions, these insecurities, this confusion to walk alongside me. And if you're here and you're a believer tonight, I want you to take some comfort in that. There's some times we get in our head this idea that faith, I might hold in one hand these questions, these doubts, this confusion, and then in the other hand, I hold on to the things that are true. And sometimes we get this picture in our head that I am so convinced, I'm so convicted, I'm so certain of the things that I hold in faith that it can put to death these questions, these insecurities, these doubts. But I want to tell you the truth. I think the truth is that as a believer, as I'm walking through this space, I not only hold on to these doubts and these questions and they come up and they walk alongside me, but I hold on to those things that I believe that are true. And faith isn't the death of these things. It's not the absence of these questions. Faith is the courage that in the face of these things, as I stare them in the face, in the eye, as I fully acknowledge that these questions and these doubts are here and they plague my mind like a splinter in my mind, in the face of them, I take the courage to choose not what I feel, not what the world tells me, but what I know is true. What God has told me is true. And when I do this, when I take that step of faith and courage, it's a step to act, it's a step to believe, It's a step to think about myself. It's a step of the way I think about other people. This has a way of changing the way in which my life functions. It's all about taking these things that God has said is true and holding those at a higher place than all these other things that I have in this other hand. And what I want us to do tonight is I want us to walk through a psalm that walks us through that exact same picture. And I'm going to walk you through verse by verse all the way down through this psalm. And in every verse, as you go down through this psalm, it's the same picture over and over again. If you miss nothing else tonight, don't miss this. In one hand, we hold on to our and to those questions, and in the other hand, we hold on to our faith. And it's the courage to turn and take the things that God has told us and hold those higher, even though we have these things of questions or these things of doubt. So, verses 1 through 3 of Psalm 42. As a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me continually, where is your God? Something... I don't know if you've grown up in the church, but I grew up in the church, and in the mid-'90s when the church was kind of making this transition between we always sing hymns to we sing kind of a mixture of hymns and praise songs, there was this praise song that came out based on this psalm, and it's obviously titled As the Deer Pants for Water. I can't even sing it now because the lyrics and the tune of this praise song kind of paint this picture like it's like a 1970s romance movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen some of those 1970s romance movies where you got the frame and, it's kind of fuzzy around the whole border of the frame, and you see these lovers running across this field to each other, and they collide in the middle into a deep embrace. And the tune of the song and the way that it's structured has got that feel. So every time I've come into here, I've come in with that mental picture of like, oh, he's panting for God because he loves him so much. But the reality is, the irony is, the psalm is saying the exact opposite. When you think about it, you don't pant for what you have. You pant for what you don't have and what you desperately need. What the psalmist is saying is, God, I'm in desperate need of you, and I can't find you. I am in desperate need of you, like I am like a deer who is in desperate need of water. And I'm panting because I can't find you. And further than that, look down in that second verse. My soul thirsts for God. Third verse. My soul thirsts for God still goes with it, but third verse. My tears have become my food day and night. God, I want you to be this calm, cool, flowing brook that I can come and I can kneel down, I can put my hands in, I can bring you up and I can drink deep of you and it can refresh my soul. But you know what I find? The only water I find to slake my thirst is my own tears. You get the picture? I'm desperate for you and I can't find you, and the only thing that I can find to drink is my own suffering. God, I'm desperate for you. What I think is interesting also about these first couple of verses is not only does this paint a picture different than what I've kind of always expected, but the enemy and the psalmist practically ask the exact same question. They both ask questions. The psalmist asks this question, God, when will I appear before you? And the enemy asks this question, where is your God? Because the expectation is if your God was here, then obviously you wouldn't be in such a desperate and dire situation, would you? I mean, if your God was here, wouldn't he be taking care of it, right? I mean, it's a pretty honest question, pretty makes sense from the enemy's perspective. And I say that they're almost parallel. If you think about it, when you're asking that question, when, you ask that question, when, because he's not here now. You see that? Same question. God, where are you? Because you're not here now. But the thing about the psalmist question is it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop at where are you? It continues to look forward to like, God, I know you're not here now. I know my current reality is desperate, and I know my current reality says I can't find you, but I know that you are still coming, and I know that you are still there, and I continue to put my faith in you. You see that? Both hands. One hand, God, where are you? And in the other hand, he's holding on to, God, I know you're still coming because of the question he's asking. All right, next section, verse 4. These things I remember as I pour out my soul. how I would go with a throng and lead them in procession to the house of God, with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. What the psalmist is doing is he's reflecting back and he's remembering a time where God was in his life. He's reflecting back and he's remembering a time where God was there. And he's saying, God, I don't know where you are now, but I can remember a time when you were. I can remember a time when I was joining with all these people in great and deep worship, and it was a powerful and moving experience for me. Because the thing is, when you're walking out here by faith, a lot of the times what we're looking for is, as we're walking out in here in faith, we're looking for that evidence that says that your faith is valid. We're out here looking for that evidence that will tell us that, what you're sinking your faith in, what you're sinking your time, what you're sinking your energy, what you're sinking all this effort in pursuing God after, that it's real, that it's true. And it's our experiences that often form these touch points, these touchstones, these anchors out in this void, out in this mystery that we can go back to and can reflect on and we can say, God, and the fact that I don't know where you are right now, I can still remember where you were and I can still remember what you did in my life. You intersected my life and you did something there. The thing about experiences is they're very slippery, vague kind of things. I don't know if any of you have ever been sad. I'm sure everybody in here has been sad at one point in time, but when you're sad and you remember back, it seems like no matter what you remember, when you think back, it's always kind of got that sad taste in your mouth. And I know at times when I'm extremely happy and I think back on those things, those experiences that have happened, it seems like I can do no wrong. See, what's happening is my experiences, those things that I can recall, they get morphed. They get changed by my perception, which makes the struggle when you're looking for things that are real all the more difficult. If you've ever seen The Christmas Carol, and there's like about 50 million versions of The Christmas Carol from like Mickey Mouse all the way up to Jim Carrey. And if you've ever seen one, in fact, I actually saw one, this is where this originally came from, this experience. I was watching James Earl Jones read The Christmas Carol. That was awesome. Darth Vader reads The Christmas Carol, but in it, if you remember, Scrooge, he goes home, he's preparing himself some dinner, and his old former partner, Jacob Marley, comes to him. And Jacob Marley is this ghost because he's died, and Jacob Marley is warning Scrooge, there's going to be 3 spirits that are going to come to you this evening, and you need to get prepared. Now, in the original story, or movie or representation that's pretty close to it, Scrooge didn't believe Marley at first. Scrooge was like, you know what? You're a figment of my imagination. This ghost thing that I'm actually seeing is just my perceptions playing tricks on me. And this is what he says. He says, speaking about perceptions, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There is more than gravy, than grave about you, whatever you are. That's the thing. It's about experiences that can sometimes make him tough. Just like Scrooge is saying, your perceptions can cheat you. They can twist on you. They can turn them into things that they're not. The second kind of hard thing about an experience is they're not really transferable very well. They don't move from person to person very well. Just because one person has an experience doesn't really mean that another person is going to have that same experience. Which sometimes makes it hard when you're like, man, I see this guy and he's having this amazing experience. Why can't I have that experience? Is there something wrong with me? Maybe I'm not walking out here in the void right because I'm not having that kind of experience. When I was, again, in the 90s, growing up in maybe like 12 or 13 at this point, there's a movement that came through the church. It was called Promise Keepers. And it was a men's conference, and you would have all these men, they would come together in these big cities, and they would make these promises to be godly and to follow after God. And then they would have them one year after another. I went to one in Portland, and then I went to another one in Seattle. It was in the Kingdom. And so when we get to the Kingdom, we packed that place out. There were like 30, 40,000 guys in there. They were on the field. They were in all of the rings of the dome. And then the band came on, and they were having this amazing worship. And I'm looking around, and I'm looking at all these other men out there. They all got their hands in the air, and you can tell that they're all visibly being moved by the Spirit, and they're having this just amazing experience. Maybe it's because I'm an engineer. I don't know. But I remember turning to my dad, who was standing right there with me, and I remember asking him, "Hey, Dad, is there something wrong with me? I'm not having this experience. You know, I'm looking at all these guys. Have I missed it? Is there something out there that I'm missing? Is there something that have I just missed Christ in general? Because I'm not being moved like I see all these people." And it really took me a long time to come to a place where I could settle down and relax and realize that I'm an engineer. I don't necessarily have the same experiences. But something else about experiences is they're not all created equal. Not every experience is the same. And there are some experiences, especially those where God intersects our life, that have weight, they have significance, they have substance that doesn't come with all the other kinds of experiences. A couple of years ago, maybe about 7 years ago, my wife and I, we were living over on the west side, and we were going to school out there. And we had some friends. We went up to Seattle to meet them. It was one of my wife's old college friends. And we went with her and her wife out to dinner, for breakfast for dinner. And we are expecting conversation A. We're going to have experience A as we go on this double date. But we get there, and we stop, and we listen to what God is saying, and listen to what he's doing, and we watch what God is doing in their life, and we see that God is doing B. Now, A is still there, but we see this other thing of B. And when my wife and I, it was a very transforming experience for us. And when we get out and we get in the car and we're driving home, I don't know how any other way to explain it, but it was like God sat in the back seat with us. It was me, my wife, and God in the back seat. Like the air was thick with him. And I can't explain it any other way. And I've been a Christian for about 30 years, and I've never had an experience like that, and I haven't had one since then like that. But God was present, tangible with us, because of the experiences that we were having. And there's something strong about that. And at night, even after having that experience, there are still times at night where I'm laying in bed, and I'll be staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, and I'll be wondering, God, is it possible that, like Scrooge, you are a piece of underdone potato to me? Is it possible I am making you up in my head? Is it possible that this whole life that I think that I'm living is a farce? And the thing is, just like the psalmist here, I come back to that experience and a lot of other kinds of experiences where God has intersected my life, and I can't deny it. And that experience gives me courage. And it gives me courage to say, in spite of the fact that I'm sitting here wondering if maybe I've made you all up in my head, yet I know that you are true. And it gives me that courage going back to that experience and yeah, God, you were there. It gives me courage to choose what I know over how I feel. Next set of verses. This is verses 6 through 8. No, I'm sorry, this is verse 5. And it says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God." Now, you know what? Looking back at the first part of the psalm, God, I'm desperate for you. I can't find you. God, the only thing I can find that I need comfort for, and the only thing I can find is my own suffering. And in the midst of all that, I've got somebody who's provoking me, telling me that there is no God out there. You know, in my book, that ranks pretty good as to like why my soul should be downcast. I'm not really going to be wrestling with really why. But what I think is important about this question that he's asking, this thing that he's bringing up, I think is the fact that he's being honest. He's being very honest about where his soul really is. Because sometimes, as we're walking through this Christian life, we get this idea that I have to be spiritually cool. I have to have it all together. And when I got it all together, that must mean that I really do believe, or that I'm really secure in the things that I believe. And when people see me, they're going to see this person of great and strong faith. And it makes it really hard to go back and be honest when we get to those places where we're in these questions, and to wrestle through like, God, I just don't know. God, I'm just struggling here. God, I have such sorrow or such suffering in my life, and I just don't know what to do with it, because you're supposed to be here, right? And it's really difficult in those places to come back and stand before God and be honest. Another reason, there's lots of reasons, but another reason why it's hard to be honest in this place is because our faith becomes so much of our identity. The things that I believe about God and the things I believe about who he says I am, it interweaves with who I am and how I know about myself. And they're inseparable. And it's really difficult to come back to some place and let that question kind of provoke me, and let that question actually get some air and breathe around, because then I have to start to really challenge, do I really know who I am? Am I really secure in my identity? And it's really difficult to be honest in these places, but I think it's powerful that the psalmist brings this out, because you know what? Our questions make us vulnerable. And the thing about vulnerable is, God has put these treasures in jars of clay. And some of the most changing experiences I've had in my spiritual walk is those places where God comes to me when I'm vulnerable, and his strength replaces my vulnerability. And I have new experiences with him. I have new growth with him. And sometimes the question is never answered. But in all those places that he's come, he'll come into those places of my vulnerability. And I think when we're honest, it opens a door for that vulnerability to happen. It opens the door for that intersection to take place. Second thing about this verse is he hopes. He says on one hand, God, I'm struggling. God, I'm suffering. God, I don't know. My soul is downcast within me. But in the other hand, he's saying, hope in God, for he is my salvation. That's another thing about faith. Faith is not only the courage to choose, but it also has this great hope. It has this great sense that whatever is going on right now is not the way it's always going to be. The reality that I find myself in now is not the reality that it's always going to be. Now some of you out there might be thinking, Bruce, I have never in my life asked the question, God, where are you? Or why is my soul downcast within me? Or when are you going to show up? But let me trot a couple of examples before you. Let's take relationships. Have any of you ever been in one of those relationships? It could be a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. It could be a best friend relationship. It could just be a friendship or an employee relationship. And despite the fact that you really enjoy being in that relationship, God is God's telling you, this is not the place for you to be. You like it. I'm glad you like it. But this just really is not the right place for you to be in the midst of this relationship. And if you're going to be honest about that, and you're going to then begin to kind of process through that, some of the first questions you're going to ask are going to be like, if I abandon this relationship, if I follow after God and I leave after this thing, then you know what? I might have to be lonely. And you know what? If I do that and if I follow after God, there might be some pain that's going to come. And the next question that's going to come after that is, am I willing to pay the cost to be lonely? Am I willing to pay that cost to be in pain? And you know what? When you start to go through the jungle of those questions and start to get down to the bottom of that, you know what's really at the bottom of that is another question. God, do I trust you? Can I trust you? Let's take example number 2, forgiveness. Have you ever been in that place? Somebody's cut you real deep. Somebody's hurt you. Somebody said something. For some reason, there are words and actions that have more ability to tear us apart than a bullet. And have you ever been in one of those places where somebody has torn you apart, and then you come back to God and God's like, I've forgiven them. I need you to. I need you to show the same kind of grace and mercy that I've shown to you. And when you start to process through that one, you get to this place where you're like, God, I don't know if I can let them off the hook. If I'm not angry, they're not paying the price. You walk through that a little bit further and you get down to a place of like, well, God, I don't know if I can show them mercy. I don't know if I can just actually let this go. You process through that one a little more. When you get down to the bottom of the stack and you're like, God, do I believe you bring justice? Will I believe that you are going to bring justice? And sitting right next to that one is, God, do I believe that you are merciful? All right? Example number 3, shame. This one I fit in all the time. Not only do I sometimes lay awake at night and wonder if God is really there, but there's a lot in this one. I think these two are really coupled together. is a lot of times I lay awake at night and I'm like, God, you know who I am. God, you know what I have done. You know where I have been and the things that I'm about. Is it even possible that you could still love me? Is it possible that you could still love me? So I don't know. Maybe you haven't necessarily asked the exact same questions that the psalmist has. But anytime that we start to walk in obedience, that obedience is going to cost us something. And when it starts to cost, we have to start wondering, what's the motivation for me to pay? And it brings up these questions. Verse 6 through 8. My soul is cast down within me. Therefore I remember you from the land of Jordan and of Hermon, from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. By day, the Lord commands his steadfast love, and at night, his song is with me, a prayer to God, to the God of my life. First thing, geography lesson. When he says from the land of Judah to Mount Hermon, those are the two southern and northernmost points of the promised land. And the promised land is this land that God promised to give the Jews. He rescues them from slavery, and he promises he's going to give them this place. And this is very parallel to the same kind of thing as he's going back, as the psalmist went back to this experience. He's coming back and he's saying, God, you've promised to do things in my life. God, you've had experiences in my life, and those things that you've promised I've seen take effect. Just like I've seen these experiences take effect. And it's a way of him to go back and make another one of those touch points. But what's also really interesting about this is what he calls out about Mount Mizar right there. And there's a waterfall. There's an enormous waterfall by Mount Mizar. And that's where he's saying this deep calls to deep, and at the roar of your waterfalls. Get this, your breakers, your waves have gone over me. This is the closest that God comes to showing up in this psalm, by the way. Notice at the beginning, what's the psalmist saying? God, I need you desperately. I need this drink of water. I need this calm, cool stream to come by and to satisfy me. And I can't find it. And the only water I can find is my own tears and my own suffering to drink. And then God, when you do show up, you ain't this calm, cool brook. You're this torrential flood that overwhelms me. And your breakers and your waves, they overwhelm and crush me. Now, if I was the psalmist, and I'm in that position, and I'm like, God, I'm begging for you to show up to refresh my soul. And when you do show up, you show up like this torrential flood. You know what the next question would be? The question would be, God, do you not see? Are you blind? You on drugs? You sleep at the wheel? I mean, what's going on here? Like, this is what I need. I need this calm, cool stream. And will you show up is not something I can actually drink from. It's something that drowns me. I want you to look at that next verse. Get that in first hand. God, you show up and you seem like you're going to drown me. Are you even aware of where I'm at? Look at the next verse in this hand. He says, you command your love over me. Now, I work here at SEL. I've been in this building for Friday lunch, in this very room. It looks really different than this. Work in a couple buildings over from here. And I'm a software engineer. I have one mission in life here at SEL. Make software that we can make money with. And I'm on a team of 6. I've got 5 other guys beneath me. And they have that exact same mission because I hand them that mission every day. We will make software that's going to make SEL money. Now, when I give them things to do, I'm extremely intentional with what I tell them to do. I don't tell them to go play solitaire. I don't tell them to go play Facebook or, let's go text on your phone to your wife and find out how your daughter's doing, right? No. I tell them to go write Java code or C++ code. Why? Because we're making a mission here. The other thing is, when I'm telling them to do that, I am paying very close attention to how well they're doing. I will tell them, I need you to go build block A. So we can take block A, B, and C and build up this huge piece of software that we're going to sell. And if you're slipping on schedule on block A, I need to know, because it's going to affect B and C. I am very attentive to where they are at. The thing about commanding, to be an effective command or to be effective in being intentional, is to have a very clear vision of where you're at and where you're going. Get that about what he said about God's love. God, you show up like this torrential flood, and it makes you feel like you have no idea what's really going on in my life. Yet he turns around and he says, God, you command your love over me, which means what? You know exactly where I am, and you know exactly where I'm going, and your love is being applied exactly where it needs to be. That's an extreme statement of faith in the face of how he might be feeling. You see that? My feelings on one hand, and I got my faith of God in the other hand. And then this next verse, I think, is my favorite verse of the entire psalm. This next little section, it says, "At night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life." You know what? The only song I can think of that gets sung at night is a lullaby. Isn't that an amazing picture? God, you're singing this lullaby over me. Now, a lullaby, I have a 3-year-old, so I've sung a couple of these. I won't sing them here because you're not my 3-year-old. But a lullaby is probably the place of the most gentleness and the most protectiveness over my 3-year-old. And when I imagine God singing something very gentle and very protective, that is the antithesis of this torrential flood that shows up. In one hand, the psalmist is holding, this is my experience. And in the other hand, he's holding, but God, this is who I know you are, and I'm choosing to go with what I know. Verses 9 to 10. "I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? As with a deadly wound in my bones, my adversaries taunt me, while they say to me continually, where is your God?" Notice that question came back up again. Where is your God? Verse 9, I think, is the pinnacle of this psalm because it shows that exact same thing. God, you are my rock in one breath, and then the next breath, have you forgotten me? And then he starts talking about this question that the enemy asks. When sometimes there are some things that just sit with us. I don't know if you've ever seen a deadly wound in your bones or a disease that attacks your bones, but it's not like a bullet to the head. It's not like bang, you're dead. A disease that attacks your bones is something that eats at you a little bit at a time for a really, really long time. It eats you from the inside out. This question that the enemy asks he's portraying it to be the exact same way. This question is eating me from the inside out. Now, as a believer, I've never poked anybody with this question. I've never, come up and asked, hey, so where is your God? But sometimes we can have this same effect. We can plant something in someone's life that can kind of eat away at that courage to choose faith by misapplying the truth. I want to tell you a story about misapplying the truth and how it can eat away. My family, my wife's family, when she was very young, they get this phone call one night, and it's, hey, I know you're living in Alabama, but you're going to need to come back down to Florida because your aunt has passed, and you need to come down for this funeral. So my family, they get in the car, and they're driving down from Alabama down to Florida. And when they get there, they find out that this wasn't some kind of surprising, tragic thing. Well, it was a surprising and tragic thing, but it wasn't like a car accident or something. But what they find out is that my wife's aunt has been raped and then stabbed to death. That's a heavy experience. It's not one of those things you just kind of, and for most of us, that's like a foreign experience. That's not something that you come across every day. And my family, as they're trying to wrestle through this and they're trying to struggle through this, they make their way back to Alabama, and there are some very, very well-meaning people that, again, this is way outside of the normal. And the question for them was like, how do you minister? How do you minister to my family in the midst of that? And a lot of people, it became just a commonplace to kind of come up to them, and they would say things like Romans 8:28, which is truth, which says that God works all things together for the good of those who love Jesus. And they would quote that to my family. And my mother-in-law is probably the most gentle person you're ever going to meet on the planet. My mother-in-law, I don't even think the word punch is in her vocabulary, but my mother-in-law wanted to punch every person that came by and said that. Because you know what you're saying? I'm suffering. I'm going through something I have no idea how to even wrap my mind around. And that verse, you're bringing this truth, And though it is, it's God's truth, but you're misapplying it in the sense that you're trying to tell me that, you know what, despite the fact that you're suffering, you should be rejoicing because God is going to take it and make it into good. That's not what you want to hear in the midst of that. Now, don't hear me wrong. There is never a wrong time for the truth. There is always the right time for the truth. But the truth doesn't always have to first be spoken. There is a place for the truth to first be lived, to earn the right to then be spoken. Because though that was one experience that my family had, there's another experience my family had, and that was a neighbor that lived next door. And while they're away at Florida and then they're coming back, that neighbor comes into their house and they clean the house. They do the laundry. They put food in the fridge. And from that point on, for many weeks thereafter, they keep inviting my family over for dinner. You know what? Don't cook tonight. Don't worry about that. Come over to my house. And that brought the most comfort and joy to my family in that midst of that struggle. And I say this to say that when we're around other people and they're kind of going through one of these experiences, because, as I said, so long as we walk in this void, we're going to be coming to these places when we walk with these experiences, where we walk through confusion or question or doubt or insecurity. What I want to leave on our minds tonight is, like, when we're there, the art of being there is not to attempt to answer somebody else's question or sink out somebody else's doubt. The art of being there is to try and give them courage to put back to God. So, in conclusion tonight, and so as the band is coming up, I'd like to leave you with a little bit of a challenge. A lot of you are going to be going home back to Thanksgiving, or you're going to be going and getting around family and friends. I want you to take the advice that the psalmist gives about experience, and I want you to invest into your future. If we know that so long as we walk through this void, that we have this chance to walk alongside of our doubts and our insecurities, I want you to invest. Over this next week, I want you to sit down and I want you to think about, where is a place that I know that God has intersected my life, that God has done something in my life and has made this difference. And I want you to go and I want you to bank that in somebody, like a vault. I want you to go and cash that in someone around you. Use the community, right? Because when you bank that experience away, then when you do come to these places, then God's going to be able to let that community come back to you and give you that courage, that in spite of the things that you may feel, or the things you may think, it will give you the courage to choose what you know is true. So let's pray and then we'll worship. Father, we thank you so much for this evening. Father, we thank you that you do love us so much and you have given your life for us. And Father, we pray as we walk through these places of doubt and confusion that your Spirit will join with our inner man and make it strong. In your precious name, amen.